Welcome back to Son of Chelsea. Daniel Childs here. Hope you're doing really well on this Tuesday. We have got a brilliant guest, someone who I've wanted to speak to for a long period of time, and that is the tactical expert, football analyst, presenter, writer, and that is Jon Mackenzie of The Athletic. You would have seen a lot of his great work analysing Chelsea, analysing the Premier League, analysing European football. He is someone that is well respected, especially in the online football community, and I'm sure you have come across his work at some point. So in today's show, we speak to Jon in extensive detail about Enzo Maresca's Chelsea. We talk about the Club World Cup. We analyse his first season, some of the evolution, the way it evolved, and moving into the transfer window, some of the profile of players moving into Chelsea this summer, and how they could fit heading into the first Moresca second season, and what are the heights and potential pitfalls of Chelsea in 25-26. It was an extensive conversation. It was one that I really enjoyed on YouTube. Probably going to put out in different parts because there are different segments of our conversation to sort of spread it out a bit. But if you do want to listen to the full conversation unedited, go over to the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, and you can listen to that full conversation right away. And of course, if you're doing that right now, thank you for tuning in. So I really do enjoy these conversations. It was lovely hearing some comments recently when we've had Eredivisie experts, when we've had experts about players coming into Chelsea this summer, how much you enjoy these conversations and why you enjoy following the channel. And I'm committed to keep on doing these conversations because for me, they're really educational. I love listening to people like Jon Mackenzie talk about football and others as well. So I really do hope you enjoy listening to the conversation. But no more rambling from me. Let's get to it right now. So Jon, thank you so much for joining me. We are obviously still technically in the off season. Some leagues are about to start and pre-season is going on, but for Chelsea it's a little bit of a weird break at the moment. I just want to ask, do you get a chance to decompress given how much ridiculous lengths of football you have to watch? Because I hope you do, because it's just insane that probably the amount of football you have to watch.
Yeah, it's funny you asked that. I'm actually just coming off the back of a month off, which sounds lovely in principle, but it's actually leave to write a book. So I have been working. That's about all I can say about the book. But yeah, it's meant, funnily enough, that I've been able to get away from sort of keeping up super close with the football, which has been really nice. The book is on football, so I have been thinking about football, but it's a bit more historical. So it's sort of thinking about football in the past. So it's been actually really nice to decompress. I covered the first half of the Club World Cup, and then sort of roughly followed the rest of it when I was off. But beyond that, all I've done really is just see where people are going transfer wise, and it's actually really good. I can recommend taking a big break like this because I think in the football industry it can be very stressful in a weird way, given that it's obviously a really fun job to do. So yeah, I'm feeling refreshed and ready to go for a new season. So you caught me at a good time.
No, it's good to hear. Unfortunately, from a Chelsea content point of view, there was kind of no break. We had the end to the season and then into the Club World Cup. It's technically now, but as you say, with the transfers, especially from a Chelsea point of view, it's never dull, and Chelsea are never quiet during this time of the year. So yeah, it keeps on going. But I just, I know you've expressed on Twitter before, like especially for people maybe aspiring to do what you do, of the amount of football you just have to sit and watch a lot of football, which I know from my own personal experience from on the kind of a weekend. By the time we reach sort of Sunday evening, I'm kind of footballed out. So yeah, you definitely need a bit of a break. We'll cover sort of the broad view of, I guess, of Moresca. I found it really interesting at the start of last season. I think it was an Athletic preview to the Chelsea-Man City opening game, and you were asked about Enzo Maresca, and there was a lot of discourse around the chaotic summer. But it was something you said that I think really stuck out to me, and where I'm interested to have this conversation now, given what's just happened, is you spoke about paint-by-numbers positional play. And you were kind of setting up the season as whether evidence that Moresca is not just a paint-by-numbers positional play coach, but a coach who actually has the ability to coach the principles into his players. Before specifically going into certain things, from where you were when you said that to where we are now, where do you put Moresca and his Chelsea side on that scale?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess to contextualize it, we're at a juncture in history, I would say, with respect to positional ideas, to coaches who use positional ideas. And to be clear about what I mean by that is, whenever I talk about positional play, what I'm simply referring to is coaches who use the positions of their players to generate advantages. So generally what that means is you have your players in a structure which allows you to pass through lines of pressure, generate free players, and as a result progress the ball down the field, right? So generally tends to be coaches who are using sort of structural ideas to add something to what the team are doing. And when I talk about paint by numbers positional coaches, what I'm meaning is that I think a lot of this comes in the wake of Pep Guardiola, who's obviously championed that kind of approach to football. He was so fantastically successful at doing that kind of football that he got a lot of copycat coaches following him. And I think for a lot of them, their thinking was, well, as long as we just repeat the structures that Guardiola uses on the field, then magically good football will happen. And I think that has proven not to be the case in a lot of instances, right? So there's a sort of curious reality about Pep Guardiola, is that everyone tried to be him, and very few coaches actually managed to produce the same effects that he did. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. We don't need to get into those now. But what I think is really interesting in the modern era is that what we're starting to see is that flexibility within your in-possession structure is becoming more and more important. I would argue that the reason for that is because we've moved from a reality where the majority of our defensive approaches tended to be zonal. So you're trying to defend space, you're trying to develop a structure which allows you to cover as much space possible. That's gradually moved towards a reality now where a lot of coaches use man-to-man ideas in order to defend, right? So you're no longer defending space, you're defending a direct opponent, an individual that you're keeping quiet. As a result of that, where previously you could use positional ideas to just move the ball through lines of pressure, finding space within structures and working through it, now you have to generate your own space, you have to generate separation between yourself and your marker in order to have the same kind of effect, in order to create those free players that can help you progress the ball. And as a result, that means that I think flexibility in your structure becomes super important. You have to be able to move to generate space, but you have to do it in such a way that you don't completely lose your structure, so that if you lose the ball, then it becomes harder to defend. And as a result of this, what we're starting to see is coaches like Luis Enrique, the classic example, for PSG, who I think, you could argue in the past has very much looked like a kind of rigid positional coach. Coming in at PSG in his first season, sort of doing the things that we expected him to do. And then in the second season, obviously having that explosion that happened midway through the season, which then culminated in them winning the Champions League. I would say that that's a really interesting example, because I think there's an argument to be made that you need to start off with the rigid positional principles in order to then introduce these more flexible elements, these rotations that we know PSG are so good at. So you need to go through you need to get the basics down first before you can then start introducing these more fluid elements. And I think this is a very long roundabout way of answering your question. The big question that we face now, I think, going into this season, is how much are we seeing that happen with Moresca at Chelsea? I think you can make the argument last season that a lot of what we saw was, a bit paint by numbersy, right? It was like a lot of making sure that the players knew what their rotations were and how they were going to form back threes, who was going to, jump into the double pivot, if your fullback was going to end up in the pockets, etc. Who's offering width, all of those kind of questions. And a lot of the time, the result was kind of interesting. And I guess I'm sure we'll go on to talk about how Moresca tried to shift the strategy as well, from playing maybe slightly more direct football into playing maybe slightly more patient possession football. But I think what's happened over the course of the Club World Cup is that Chelsea fans are now saying, oh, what we're seeing now is evidence of of the next phase where we go from that paint by numbers positional approach to this more rotational fluid system, which generates the kind of positional football that we've seen PSG be playing. I'm not sure if I would go the full way on that quite yet. I think the Club World Cup final is doing a lot of heavy lifting for Chelsea fans in terms of growth and development. But I would say that I'm a lot more positive about my assessment of Moresca as the season has gone on. And I think, there was elements in the Club World Cup that made it clear that there's a lot of experimentation going on both in and out of possession. And again, that makes it very difficult to assess. And for all Chelsea fans who want me to come on and be just like wildly positive, I apologise. That's just not. It's not who I am. I'm not like that about any club really, because I think there's always questions to be raised. And I think we're going to talk about the Club World Cup. I think what's interesting about the Club World Cup is there was lots of experimentation in terms of in possession and out of possession structures and approaches. I think the final was a game which really suited Chelsea and allowed them to do the things they do really well. And as a result, I think that maybe there's an overemphasis on quite how far Chelsea have come. But I still think that there's plenty to be positive about. I think not least because you've got a coach who's still there after a season, right? And it's been a while since that happened. So, I think I am more positive about Moresca. Well, maybe not more positive about Moresca than I was at the beginning of last season. I just think we've got more evidence to argue that he deserves the chance this season, and I think he'll give it a good go of challenging for the Champions League spots again, maybe a little bit more consistently than they did last season as well.
In terms of the Club World Cup final, especially, I mean, in terms of Chelsea performances, just looking at one individual performance, one of the first things my dad said to me, texting me after the game, it's like one of the best Chelsea performances I've ever watched in terms of my life supporting the club. And I felt similar. And I do agree with you that you have to add the context of the team we're playing, that PSG were never going to rock up and hit us with a low block. Like, it's just never going to happen. And I've been a firm believer since, Pochettino. I mean, even if you look far back in Chelsea's history, we've always been a very effective transition team. We've always been a very effective counter-attacking team. It's part of what I think Chelsea fans like about us as kind of our DNA. We don't have a Chelsea way. Like, we don't have a style, a rigid historical style that we have to stick to. But just on that, I guess the final in itself, I agree, is kind of its own thing in some ways. But even in the knockout stages especially, I found it quite curious watching specifically the Benfica game is the one that stands out to me, because Benfica did hit Chelsea with a deeper defence, and suddenly I'm seeing Cucurella play not as an inverted fullback, he's playing more as a wing-back, and Gusto obviously in the final playing as a wing-back. So that evolution is, do you think it's, because it's, I guess at the moment you could equally argue, because we haven't seen the Premier League yet, that it could be deemed as just its own thing, the Club World Cup, or is it in some ways a pre-season experimentation from Moresca? He's trying new things with the group, he's pushing them in new ways for the preparation, because there's no pre-season really for Chelsea this year, for the upcoming year.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting in a lot of ways, namely because like Chelsea clearly were taking the Club World Cup seriously. I think they realised that not only was there a lot of money at stake, but I think they saw it as a good stage to almost showcase where they were at the end of the season as well. And so I suppose I went into it just expecting Moresca to carry on doing the sorts of things we'd seen a little bit last season, just sort of take it quite seriously and not see a huge amount of tactical experimentation. But in the end, the reality was that, and again, like, I apologise to Chelsea fans who want me to just be like wildly positive, but in the end, the majority of the opponents that you faced were sort of quite nice for experimentation against. Like, you were clearly the better team than the most of all of the teams that you faced, right? But at least up until the final, and then there was sort of fun. There was the sort of funny happenstance that City dropped out, and Al Hilal dropped out before you met them as well, right? So it sort of gave Moresca the opportunity to be a bit more experimental, and I think he would have been had he come up against some of those bigger teams earlier on. So we saw the flirtation with the sort of 4-2-2-2 shape that we saw Guardiola using at the end of last season, with your fullbacks offering width and sort of being quite aggressive. Was that against Flamengo? Was that who it was, or was it
Yeah,
Palmeiras? He
Palmeiras,
plays.
I guess. There was a trilogy of South American games,
Yeah,
and I think the Flamengo one was the one where I think there was a lot of chatter after about how he'd experimented, but just from my perception, it didn't feel like he experimented that much.
right,
It was more against Palmeiras, I think, because Palmeiras were definitely, especially in the first half, were playing man to man, and you had
right.
Andre Santos kind of playing quite deep in as a defensive midfielder. Where I think Reece James was supposed to play, because if I remember rightly, Reece James got injured in the warm up.
So I think I am thinking of the Flamengo again. That's the one where Reece James played as an 8 almost, right? And then you had Neto on the left coming inside and playing as almost a second striker, and Palmer dropping off in the wide area. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I just sort of read it as him experimenting with creating dynamic space to it, creating space for fullbacks to receive the ball in dynamic scenarios, see how that played out. It left you a little bit open from a rest defense point of view, but it was fine. It was the sort of game where you could afford to do that. There was a game later on where I put a tweet out because there was one game where you were jumping fullback to fullback in your hybrid press, which just felt like 5 years out of date for me. And I thought it was kind of, again, it was a game where you kind of think, why experiment with this? It feels like having a conversation where the answer has already been decided in advance, or a debate where the answer has already been decided in advance. But again, I think it's just about trying to see what you can do, and those are the games where you can get away with it, right? If it doesn't work out, it's probably not going to be terminal. So I think, again, that was kind of interesting. And then, really getting into the final, and then almost completely changing up the way that you're playing, going from being a team who were largely dominating to a team who were happy to be quite reactive and take on the tactical conditions that were posed to you by PSG, and doing a pretty good job of it. I think that kind of thing is obviously a positive thing. In terms of, there's going to be games this season where you aren't going to be the better team, and you are going to have to be a bit reactive and see what you can get away with. So that kind of thing is really good. I would say that what really struck me with the Club World Cup really was the fact that Moresca was quite willing to change things up. There was quite a bit of experimentation. I think even just with things like set pieces and stuff like that, they were clearly working on new material and things like that. So and I think that bodes well for Chelsea, that you're able to actually develop some of these more tactical ideas in a competitive environment, and see what you come up with. I think also the fact that you were able to use João Pedro midway through changed things up as well. I don't think you win that Club World Cup final without João Pedro, because I think he just sort of changed a few things in and out of possession that just made things work much better as well. So, and I think that stands Chelsea really good stead as well, that you have a coach who can bring in these. Obviously, you're constantly bringing in really high level players, but if he can insert them into the team and immediately have tactical advantages showing in those games with very little turnaround, I think that's a positive thing to take away as well.